Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. I will never understand why companies keep managers around who are clearly scaring away employees. Bad management will ruin a business. If you take care of your employees will take care of your business. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're new here and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. Here we go. Okay, I'll leave then. So a few years ago, I was a barista at a well-known coffee shop that features green aprons. It was a pretty good gig in a tourist town that saw easily 1.5 million tourists per year, especially around Christmas. During the month of December, the lobby would be so full of people waiting outside, and the drive-through line sometimes caused traffic to back up on the main road. The manager who hired me was an absolute gem. When I was hired, I explained that I had CPTSD from an abusive relationship. She was totally cool with this, and we had a system worked out where if I started having a bad panic attack, I could switch to washing dishes, and she would send someone else out to deal with customers for an hour or two. I didn't use this often, but I was thankful this was in place when I needed it. Unfortunately, this manager ended up stepping down after the tragic death of a family member. I don't fault her for this, but it really sucked. For the first 2 months, we were without a manager. Managers from other stores were filling in when needed, and since I would work at a few different stores, they knew me and gave me the same treatment. If I had a panic attack, I could go wash dishes or do the trash or restock so I could have a moment of quiet. Cue the new manager getting hired. He was a total jerk and basically thought mental health was BS and just an excuse. I'd been on front register for 3 hours and felt that familiar chest-tightening feeling again. I explained to him what was going on and asked if I could switch out for dishes, backroom work for a bit to calm down. He looked at me like I was absolute trash and replied, "No, I already have everyone where I want them, and if you don't like it, you can just leave." So I did just that. I went to the back, packed up my stuff, and walked out the door on one of the busiest days of the year. He was left having to cover dishes and register for the day. I didn't find out about the fallout until weeks later after I'd been working at my new job and one of my old coworkers came in. Apparently, my leaving was just the beginning of over half the staff quitting because of his constant abuse. And by the end of the month, only about 3 original staff were left, and he was scrambling to hire and train people during the busiest month of the year. Edit. For everyone saying I should have gone after him in court, I live in an at-will state. All he has to do is say I walked off the job. The burden to prove why is on me. It's a long, costly process that people who are taking Amazon surveys and pawning their stuff to put gas in their car can't really afford. And our second story. Loaded first? As you wish. I've been working with logistics for about 17 years now and gained a bunch of experience. My main occupation has been in a port loading and discharging ro-ro vessels. Most of those have ramp in the aft, which all loading discharging goes through, unlike passenger ferries, where you can open a hatch in the fore since it's easier to drive on and then drive off. Some 12 to 13 years ago, a VIP customer for a truck manufacturer called our office. I got the call and informed me he'd gotten the number from the agency because he had certain instructions for the loading of a special truck. Okay, so I hear him out. Turns out this truck is going on exhibition somewhere on the continent and is a bit late from the factory. To save time, he'd hired some photographer that would take some photos of the truck when it rolled off the vessel in the receiving port. He was very insistent that we load it first so it would come off first. Now in the business, we have a term for express cargo that's LOFO, last on, first off, which means we load the unit last on deck so it'll be first off. And this I explained to him, but he insisted we load it first, probably thinking we operated passenger ferries while in fact we operated cargo vessels. So I once again tried to explain, but he would not listen. I finally just gave in and said, "Okay, I'll load it first," thinking I'll load it last to make sure it comes off first thing. We hang up, so I thought that was it. Now I can plan the rest of the operation and mind my own business. Moments later, agency called and told me the customer had called them being very concerned his unit won't be loaded first. Now, I know the people on the agency very well since we talk several times on a daily basis, and they also know me. And they also know how the vessels are designed and in which order operations go. So they also tried to explain, but the customer still insisted. Now I also got some additional information about the photographer in the receiving port. He was hired by the hour, so it was important he does not need to wait in vain. So we agree that we load the truck according to LOFO principle for the sake of the customer. He doesn't need to know. Time passes, vessel arrives, and we start operation. The truck also enters the port. It looked kind of cool, kitted with everything extra you could think of. Also, the customer calls and asks why we've not loaded the truck yet. See, there's a GPS unit in it, which will let the customer know of any movements. So I explain we're still discharging and can't load it yet. Customer: but the vessel arrived an hour ago. I see no point in trying to explain since he's all railed up. So I just tell him we're going to start loading soon. He hangs up. Moments later, the agency calls again. Obviously, he's been bugging them and they just want to let off some steam. So we laugh a bit about it and then we decide to move the truck onto the vessel so that his damn GPS will make a ping. Right after we hung up, the customer calls again and demand we load the truck now. Now! Okay, we'll load it now, I say, and I hang up. Somewhat annoyed by now. I'm used to this behavior. In logistics, it seems that the one making the most noise gets their way. I never take it personally, and I don't really care. I always try to make the best solution for everyone. Anyhow, now the manager for the agency calls me and wants to know why the customer's so railed up. So I explain to him, and he's like, okay with the explanation. He knows me and knows what I'm saying is correct, but asks me to hurry up with the loading. So I radio if the stevedores to put the truck somewhere on the main deck where it won't be in the way. We'll move it later so that it'll be positioned as one of the first units off. Customer calls a few minutes later since the GPS probably reported movement and goes something like this. I should not have to call managers to get crap done around here, should I? I idly reply with a dry, "You're welcome," and hung up. Now I'm actually annoyed for real. Sometime later, the stevedores let me know they've emptied the lower hold, the part that takes the longest to discharge but is quickest to load, so I tell them to put the truck in the deepest corner of lower hold. Customer should be satisfied with it being loaded first, as per request. So we fill the rest of the vessel. I send a report to my manager in the agency, what happened, and goes home. 36 hours later, the vessel arrives in the receiving port. Photographer is in place, also the customer, I got told later on. I can only imagine how boring the wait must have been. Week later, the agency received a written complaint from the customer that he had to pay the photographer for the waiting. But it felt kind of low effort. Not a word on loaded first. I think the customer finally understood and learned his lesson. Years later, I actually met the customer in person, and he turned out to be a really nice person. We've had many dealings with each other since then. I even asked if he remembered the truck incident. He did. It was his first big assignment, and he was so stressed out about it. Go figure. Anyway, we have a good relationship between us. Agency, port, and customer now. Seems he learned his lesson about not listening, then chilled out. Very rare. And our next story. Told my stepmom she needed to move out in a few months. My dad married my stepmom 7 years ago. She's not a bad woman, and she's not a gold digger either. She and my dad are legitimately in love. However, my dad doesn't have much time left due to medical issues. He likely won't make it till summer. My dad and I weren't close. He was military, and if he wasn't gone, he was in a crappy mood. My mom was in the picture, but she wasn't a peach either, so I was raised by my grandparents in their home. Neither of my parents could tell you my birthday 3 years ago to give you an idea of it. I don't hate either of my parents, but I don't really recognize them as my parents either. My dad's been a much better dad to my stepmom's son, which is good, and I'm grateful for that. However, I don't feel a bond with my stepbrother or stepmom either. When my grandma passed, she left me her home in her will, as that was what my grandparents wanted. My dad and his wife moved in with my permission while I was away at school. It was no secret that I intended to move back and live alone in my home, which has caused some conflicts in the past. This past weekend, while I was studying, stepmom sent me an email filling me in on dad again, telling me about her COVID layoff and asking what my plans were after this last semester. So I told her I was returning home and had a job lined up by an old friend. Stepmom asked if I felt it would be crowded there, and I reminded her that it was my home, so if anyone was uncomfortable, they would need to relocate. Stepmom pushed back a little, and I reminded her again the home was mine, and they needed to be ready to leave by summer's end, as this is my last semester, and I wanted to give them plenty of time to relocate. My dad ended up calling me later and tried to guilt me. However, I reminded him that he didn't really raise me, and I was under no obligation to help them as much as I already did. I called his wife after and told her that after my dad passed, she was gone for what she just tried to do. The summer deal was off, and I would evict after 60 days, which is still more than required. I told her my dad chose a military career over his son, and when he wasn't lacing his boots, he was yelling at me or throwing stuff. Stepmom brought her child's education into it because they couldn't afford to live in a good school district when this was over, but I told her neither he nor she was my concern. I told my friends about this, and they all thought I was right because of what I've already done for them and what my dad did in the past. They've said the stepmom is just another person in the world, and it sucks for her, but you can't set yourself on fire to keep them warm. And our last story. My neighbor built a tunnel to steal fuel from my oil refinery. This is a story that my friend from Siberia once told me. English is not my native language, but I'm not from Russia either. We were studying together at university, and let's call my friend John. John's father was a wealthy Siberian businessman, and one of his ventures was a small oil refinery until Putin started replacing such businesses with his own methods of extortion and things far worse. Now let's get to the story. John's father's oil refinery was located about a kilometer away from the town. It produced diesel fuel and its byproducts. There was a pipeline from the refinery that transported the diesel to a larger fuel storage station. At some point, a new neighbor appeared near the refinery around 500 meters away. There was an old abandoned sawmill there, which was bought by some shady character. Since he was far enough, nobody would have known about the new owner of the sawmill if it weren't for this incident. He dug a tunnel and laid a pipe connecting it to the refinery's pipeline. He would extract around 0.001% of the diesel from Oleg's, John's father's, refinery, which amounted to a tanker truck of fuel every 2 days. Strangely enough, nobody noticed this. The neighbor of Oleg would sell the fuel to agricultural companies in neighboring regions. One of the owners of such a company happened to be John's father. He was astonished at how it was possible to sell the fuel at a lower price than the refinery owner himself and still make a profit. Initially, Oleg checked the quality of the fuel, and it turned out to be similar to his own. Then Oleg hired a private detective to investigate the matter, engage in industrial espionage, and that's how he discovered that his fuel was being taken by someone else. Part of the tunnel was dug on his neighbor's property. John didn't tell me what happened next with these unfortunate businessmen. He said he didn't know. But knowing the local customs, I assume it wasn't a pleasant situation for them. Friends, there are less and less interesting stories left on Reddit. So what do you think of this translated from other languages and stories from other countries of the world? Leave your opinion in the comments, so I know if I should take interesting stories from outside. Thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.